She's the chief of police. And Patricia sent fake cops to my door. The man standing on my porch didn't have jurisdiction. His badge was fake, the cuffs on his belt were props, and his boots were new. Too new for real patrol wear. His partner stood too close, squared off like a bouncer, not a beat cop. This wasn't enforcement. It was intimidation in costume. "You've been flagged for non-compliance," the taller one said, voice clipped. "You're under HOA directive. We're authorized to detain you." I didn't blink. I let the porch camera blink for me, its red LED pulsing like a heartbeat. Every second, footage was being mirrored to my secure drive, to my cloud backups, and to one last place, a secure municipal node still technically registered to the cyber forensics unit I used to help train. I stepped forward, not back. "You're trespassing. And if you don't leave now, the woman who signs your warrants is going to want a word." If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. The second one twitched, just slightly. "We've been retained by the HOA to enforce immediate compliance under Section 12.4. "Retained," I echoed. "Not dispatched, not sworn, not legal." "My name's Nathan Cole, retired law enforcement, private security consultant, former instructor on municipal fraud detection. And I've seen exactly this kind of amateur theater before, usually right before someone gets arrested for impersonating a peace officer. Patricia Leland, the newly crowned queen of the Silvercrest Estates HOA, thought sending 2 unlicensed compliance officers to my home would scare me. That I'd roll the van out of view, silence my objections, and play nice. But Patricia forgot who this house belonged to. This isn't just a driveway. It's the last place my wife stood before chemo stole her balance. That cedar bench beside the hydrangeas, she carved it with her own hands. It's where my daughter sits every weekend, soldering microchips into node relays for the community watch system her mom founded. The vehicle they flagged as a nuisance, it's marked, licensed, and exempted by municipal law. I helped write those laws. Patricia didn't care. She'd already fined me 3 times. Once for the bench, once for a light bulb that didn't match community tone, and now for the vehicle I use to keep the neighborhood safe. A vehicle my daughter and I drive together, in silence, on weekends. Because some memories are too heavy to speak aloud. Last week they tagged my mailbox. This week they sent these guys. What Patricia didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, is that the chief of police for this district used to be my partner, Andrea Salazar. We walked into crime scenes together. We cleared rooms together. She was the first one at my wife's funeral, and the first to promise my daughter she'd always be protected. So, no, I wasn't afraid of 2 fake cops and a clipboard. I was furious. "You have 10 seconds to remove yourselves from my property," I said, as the door behind me creaked open. My daughter was watching now, quiet, just behind the cedar bench. Her fingers clutched the strap of her tablet case, the one with the built-in recorder. She didn't speak. She didn't have to, because we'd trained for this. "Walk away," I said to the taller one. "You're not law. You're not even close. And when this footage hits the desk of the woman you're pretending to work for, I hope you enjoy the inside of a holding cell." They didn't argue. They left. They didn't run. They just backed away, like someone had finally reminded them they weren't the ones holding power. I closed the door, sat down beside my daughter on the bench. The scent of jasmine oil still lingered on the wood. This wasn't about a van. This was about control, about intimidation, about seeing how far they could push someone they thought had no fight left. But Patricia just made the biggest mistake of her career. Where are you watching from? Because she sent impersonators to my home. And the woman who runs this city's police force still calls me partner. The notice board by the community pool looked like a propaganda wall. Brightly laminated flyers flapped in the breeze, each stamped with the Silvercrest Estates HOA logo in bold blue font. "Maintain community standards. Violations will be enforced. Reminder, security presence is authorized." The last one had a stock photo of a man in uniform, sunglasses on, arms crossed. Not a city badge, no insignia, just the performance of power. I stood there with a bottle of water in my hand, pretending to read it like everyone else. But I wasn't reading. I was cataloging. The language had changed. It wasn't just reminders anymore. It was intimidation, fear marketing. Patricia's escalation wasn't personal. It was policy. Over the last 2 months, subtle signs had started showing. The newer residents, retired professionals, single parents, military families, were the ones getting notices. Unapproved potted plants, visible utility trailers, frequent guest vehicles. One man, a Navy vet named Lucas, got a fine for non-standard flagpole lighting 2 days after his kid's birthday. He paid it even though he shouldn't have. Most people did. That was the game. I'd played it too once, back when I thought my silence might buy peace. But now I was watching the pattern unfold, an HOA board using compliance as a weapon. And Patricia was at the center of it, grooming the neighborhood like a queen shaping her court. The older board members had stepped down right after she took over. One moved out. One stopped answering emails. The only ones left were the quiet ones, like Darren, the treasurer, who I hadn't seen at a single public event in weeks. I crossed the pool patio slowly, nodding to Mrs. Hargrove, who was walking her dog near the gate. She avoided my eyes, not out of spite, out of fear. It wasn't hard to trace the timeline. Patricia took over 6 months ago after the previous president moved states. She ran unopposed, promised refinement and community elegance. She got the votes by talking about safety and property values. And once she was in, she rewrote the rulebook. The new bylaws were vague. That was the genius of them. They didn't say no security vehicles, but they reclassified them under commercial appearance violations. The cedar bench was no longer landscaping, but furniture in common view. And most importantly, she added a new clause. Privately retained enforcement partners may be authorized by HOA board vote. Enforcement partners. Like the ones who stood on my porch yesterday, pretending they had handcuffs that mattered. I walked past the tennis courts. A dad was coaching his son through drills. I recognized the man, Carlos, who got cited for unregistered landscaping contractors last week because his nephew helped trim a hedge. He'd fought it, filed an appeal. Patricia denied it and added a late fee. As I passed, I caught the glance, the quick darting acknowledgement between men who know what it means to be watched. Carlos didn't say anything, but his expression said enough. Something had changed in this neighborhood, and not everyone was okay with it. I pulled out my phone and opened my internal log, each incident, each fine, each name. I'd been tracking them ever since the second citation hit my inbox. Not because I planned on doing anything with it at first, but now seeing how broad the damage had become, it felt like a warning flare had gone up. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about control, manipulation, targeting, and something else too, money. The fines had jumped from $50 warnings to $150 penalties. The clause allowing direct property liens had been quietly reinstated. That alone could ruin someone who didn't know how to fight it, especially if they were grieving. Distracted, like I'd been when it started. I scrolled to the name at the bottom of my list. Darren Mays, treasurer, silent vote, no public presence. I remembered him from the annual cookout a year ago. Quiet guy, numbers brain, never talked more than necessary. But he was there when Patricia introduced the idea of neighborhood refinement. He was the one who nodded along but didn't clap. And since then, I hadn't seen him on any calls, not in any photos. But his name still showed up on board minutes. Every decision, every motion passed unanimously. That kind of silence wasn't just compliance, it was fear or guilt. And in my line of work, guilt always left a paper trail. I shut my phone and turned back toward the street. The wind picked up, fluttering one of the notices loose from the board. It, tumbled across the pavement, flipping like a dead leaf until it landed at my feet. I picked it up. Non-standard structures will be removed by board-approved agents. I folded it in half, slid it into my pocket, and walked home. If Patricia was preparing for war, she was about to find out. I've already got her strategy mapped and time-stamped. Darren Mays didn't answer his door the first time I knocked. From the outside, his house looked like every other one on Crestline Way. White stone facade, arched entry, identical mailbox. But his front yard hadn't been edged in a while, and the grass crept slightly over the sidewalk. Not enough to draw a violation, but enough to suggest he'd stopped caring who noticed. I knocked again, slower this time. A vertical slit in the blinds twitched, then stilled. I waited, 10 seconds, then 15. Finally, the deadbolt clicked. Darren opened the door just wide enough for his face to show. No smile, no greeting. Just a tired man blinking against sunlight he hadn't planned to let in. "What do you want?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Just 5 minutes," I said. "Off the record." His eyes scanned the street behind me. His fingers lingered on the edge of the door, like he was weighing the risk of being seen. But then something shifted. Not quite trust. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe guilt. He let the door open halfway and stepped aside. Inside, the place felt dim. The blinds were half drawn, and the light filtering in caught the dust in the air. His living room smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. An unopened stack of HOA documents sat on the side table beside a neglected mug, the same HOA documents he was supposed to help enforce. "I'm not supposed to talk to residents directly," Darren muttered, not looking at me. "I'm not here as a resident," I said, staying near the door. "I'm here as someone who saw what Patricia sent to my porch yesterday." That landed. His spine stiffened, just slightly. Not from surprise, but recognition. "They didn't touch you, did they?" he asked quickly. They're not allowed to." "They didn't get the chance," I said. "But they tried." 2 fake uniforms, badges with no state ID. Said they were enforcing a compliance detainment. "You sign off on that?" Darren's mouth opened, but no words came out. He sat down hard on the edge of his couch and rubbed his face. "She told us it was temporary," he said finally. "Just for certain situations. To visually reinforce authority. That's what she called it. I didn't move. She said they were licensed," he continued, more to himself than to me. "That they were vetted contractors. I never saw the paperwork. I asked once and she said the board approved it. But I am the board that made him stop." He looked up at me, suddenly realizing the absurdity of his own words. "She makes it sound like we voted," he said quietly. "Like, we're all in agreement, but we're not." He pulled a folder from beneath a stack of magazines. It was dog-eared, the clasp barely holding it shut. He hesitated before handing it to me. "I shouldn't show you this," he said, "but I didn't sign most of these disbursements. I didn't authorize the fund reallocations for the security budget, but somehow my name's on every approval log." I opened the folder slowly. The printouts were summaries, monthly financials, board memos, internal votes. But the digital signatures, they were duplicated across multiple entries. Same timestamp, same sequence. Forged. "I kept these offline," he said. "Everything Patricia sends now is through her private email, not even the official HOA domain. I started saving them because I thought I might need them." His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes tired, shoulders slumped. "Because no one wants to be the one who gets their property liened. You think I don't know how she operates?" Lucas tried to push back, and 2 weeks later, his sprinklers got flagged. His mailbox got cited. His wife started getting anonymous calls at work. "And you?" "My wife left last year, moved to Tucson, said the house felt like a prison." He didn't say it bitterly, just like it was a fact he'd accepted. "I didn't fight Patricia because I thought if I stayed quiet, she'd leave me alone. But she hasn't. And now it's gone too far." He stood and walked to the window, peeking through the blinds. "If you're planning to take her down, you better do it soon," he said, not turning. "Because if she finds out you're building a case, you won't just be fighting her. You'll be fighting everyone she's scared into silence." I closed the folder carefully. "I don't need everyone," I said. "I just need one person who's ready to speak." He didn't answer, but he didn't ask for the folder back either. That was enough, for now. The 4th violation came wrapped in plastic, pinned to my windshield by what looked like a brand new clipboard clamp. This one wasn't typed in the usual template. It was glossy, almost professional looking. "Urgent notice, final opportunity to comply." Below that, in bold letters, "Unauthorized vehicle presence will trigger community enforcement action." I scanned the QR code printed in the corner. It redirected to a shadowy subdomain of the HOA's website I hadn't seen before. one labeled compliance.silvercrest-secure.org. Password protected, no public access. They were building their own enforcement portal now. I'd seen these tactics used in corporate security work. Covert URLs, controlled access, plausible deniability. Patricia wasn't just inventing violations anymore. She was creating an entire infrastructure to validate them after the fact. The game had changed. Inside the house, my daughter sat at the workbench, twisting a resistor into a perf board under a magnifying lamp. Her soldering lines were cleaner than mine now. I hadn't told her about the men on the porch yet, not in detail. She knew something had happened, but she hadn't asked. She didn't need to. The way she kept glancing at the front door between circuits said enough. I watched her for a moment, then stepped back outside with my phone in hand and began pacing the driveway. I needed to think. I needed this pattern to reveal itself. Every notice escalated in tone, and everyone had Patricia's signature at the bottom, not in ink, but embedded in the digital print, faint watermark style. A signature that would be easy to automate with a digital stamp, one that could be applied without her ever physically seeing the notice. That mattered because it meant there was someone else involved. She had help. The notices weren't being delivered by board members. They were being printed, distributed, and now cataloged on a separate web portal. That kind of system requires back-end work. Scripting, hosting, authorization. Someone in the loop had access to tech. I opened my laptop and logged into the original HOA portal, the one meant for residents. Clean design, monthly newsletters, PDF links to bylaws that hadn't been updated publicly since last year. I checked the footer, site maintained by d.mays@screstboard.org Darren. I leaned back in my chair, processing. Of course, he'd built the original portal, and if Patricia had gone off script, she would have needed someone else to create the parallel system, someone who wouldn't ask questions, or someone who had no choice. I pulled up a cached version of the compliance subdomain link from earlier. It failed to load, but the error code confirmed my suspicion. Access denied. User not whitelisted, which meant the system wasn't just password protected. It was operating on a restricted IP access list. That was federal contractor level control. Too advanced for a local HOA board, unless they were trying to keep city regulators out of it entirely. I copied the URL and ran a basic header trace. The server was registered through a private hosting service out of Nevada. No HOA uses that level of masking unless they're laundering something or hiding something. I saved the trace. Then I opened the city's code enforcement portal and cross-checked every single HOA in the district that had compliance authority logged with the municipal property records. Silvercrest Estates wasn't on the list. We weren't even registered under the active enforcement directory, which meant Patricia's citations weren't just overreach. They were legally toothless. And those contractors on my porch, they didn't even have the cover of procedural gray zones. Patricia had fabricated an entire internal enforcement system without any legal standing. I hit print on the trace report and stapled it to the original notice from my windshield. 2 pages. Enough for someone who knew how to read them. I walked them over to my desk drawer, slid them in beside Darren's forged signature copies, and shut the drawer without locking it. Because the locks didn't matter now. The escalation wasn't theoretical anymore. She wasn't issuing warnings. She was issuing ultimatums, backed by shadows dressed in fake uniforms. But now I had something real, a system she'd built without the city's approval, a weapon I could use. All I had to do was choose the right person to deliver it to, and make sure they understood exactly who Patricia had tried to impersonate. Because the moment she sent those men to my porch, she crossed the line from overreach into fraud. And that's the kind of thing that gets real officers involved. City Hall always smelled like carpet glue and toner. I hadn't stepped foot inside in over a year, not since I stopped consulting for the department, but the security kiosk still had my name in the database, and the officer at the front recognized me before I could even hand over ID. "Back on contract?" he asked casually. "Just saying hello," I said, slipping the trace report and windshield notice into a manila folder. He didn't press. Upstairs, the Municipal Code Enforcement Division sat behind reinforced glass and polite bureaucracy. A woman named Valerie manned the front desk, a veteran admin with a memory sharper than most detectives. She leaned over the counter. "Mr. Cole? Been a while? Still keeping everyone honest?" I asked. She smiled. "Only the ones who try to sneak ordinance changes through lunch meetings." I handed her the folder. "I need eyes on this. Off record. Just for confirmation." She opened it slowly, flipping through the printouts. I watched her eyebrows lift at the server trace, then furrow at the QR-coded violation notice. By the time she got to the HOA bylaws excerpt with Patricia's digital signature, she was already shaking her head. "This isn't approved," she said. I figured. But I needed it from someone who could certify the gap. Valerie reached under the counter and slid a form across to me. "This one's for anonymous submission. But you'll want to check this box here. Potential misrepresentation of authority. It flags it for pre-legal review." I filled it out in silence. It wasn't just that the HOA lacked registration as a compliance-authorized entity. It was that Patricia had bypassed every legal channel to act like she had it. Fines, liens, threat of seizure, all under the pretense of municipal enforcement. That pretense made this fraud. "I'm not saying it'll move fast," Valerie warned, taking the completed form. "But if there's impersonation involved, well, someone in uniform will be asking questions." "Real ones?" I nodded and turned to leave. But halfway to the stairwell, I stopped. There was one more office in this building I hadn't visited in years, and if anyone would understand the full weight of what I was about to unleash, it was her, Andrea Salazar, chief of police, former partner, the godmother to my daughter, the one person in the city who'd never asked me to explain my grief, only where I wanted it to go. I didn't need to see her badge to trust her. I'd seen her drag it through mud, blood, and courtroom crossfire. She wasn't a desk cop. She was a survivor. But I wasn't here for memory. I was here for facts. Her assistant ushered me in after a short wait. Her office hadn't changed. Books aligned by region, framed service awards in the same corner. The only difference was the small family photo on the edge of her desk. Her kids were older now. "You look like you've been chewing glass," she said, standing to greet me. "I've got something you need to see." She took the folder from my hand and read in silence, her jaw tightening with each page. When she reached the server trace, she looked up. "Is this where they're hosting the fake enforcement database?" "Yes. And they sent 2 men, dressed to intimidate, to my house last week. Claimed they were authorized to detain me. No paperwork. No state IDs." Her fingers drummed on the folder edge. "They touch you?" "No, but my daughter was watching." That changed her posture. She sat back, exhaled through her nose. "You want me to bury this quietly?" she asked. "Handle it internally?" I shook my head. "I want you to treat it like what it is. Criminal impersonation, fraudulent citations, HOA overreach with city property records as cover, and you're clean on your end? Every inch, vehicle is exempt, bench is historical, lighting is compliant. All the violations came after Patricia changed the board structure and funneled money into a separate enforcement initiative." Andrea closed the folder, stood, and opened a locked drawer. Inside, she pulled out a plain black case, evidence submission envelope. She slid the folder inside. "I'll send a unit to verify the complaint records. Quietly. Then we'll trace the security contractor license. If it's expired or never existed, this gets bumped to the DA." I nodded once. "Thank you." She walked me to the door, paused, and lowered her voice. "You picked the right moment to bring this in," she said, "because I've been hearing whispers. Other HOAs, different names, same tactics. This might be bigger than just Patricia." I didn't flinch. "I hope it is," I said, because that meant she wouldn't see what was coming next. The tag showed up on the cedar bench 2 days later. This time, it wasn't paper. It was a bright orange plastic placard, zip-tied to the backrest, bold letters stamped across it. "Non-compliant structure, removal order pending." I didn't touch it, didn't cut the zip tie. I left it exactly where it was, knowing the camera above the porch captured every second. I stepped back and took a still photo. Timestamp, wide frame. Enough context to show the house, the bench, and the notice, without me in it. Inside, my daughter was already staring through the front window, Her mouth parted just slightly like she hadn't processed what she was seeing yet. "They tagged Mom's bench," she said quietly, not turning. I nodded once. "I saw." She walked past me, barefoot on the hardwood, and stepped onto the porch. No jacket, no hesitation. She stood in front of the bench and just stared. Not at the tag, but at the grain of the wood. The way it caught the morning sun like it used to when her mom sat there with a mug of tea and a sketch pad full of circuit ideas. "They can't take it, right?" she asked. "Not legally. But they'll try." Her voice was flat now. She'd learned that from me. The controlled tone, the blank affect. Like if we didn't show the fear, maybe we wouldn't have to feel it. I crouched beside her. "That bench is where she planned the neighborhood watch project. Every sensor node you helped me build started right here. That placard's not a threat. It's a mistake." I looked down the street. A white SUV idled at the corner. No logos, no plates. Just another one of Patricia's intimidation games. She wanted me to react, to yell, to tear the tag off and make it look like I was the problem. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was done absorbing. I opened the garage and rolled out the work table. My daughter followed without being asked. She knew the pattern now. Layout, check components, prep soldering rig. But today, I pulled out a different set of tools. "This isn't for a sensor?" she asked. "No," I said, tightening the clamp on the steel plate. "It's for a mounting bracket." I'd spent years installing surveillance equipment for federal buildings and city substations. I knew how to hide tech in plain sight. I also knew how to document chain of custody, retain audit logs, and submit compliant video footage for legal evidence. And now, I was building something I hadn't needed in years. A time-stamped perimeter node, built to monitor approach vectors and object interaction on private property. Translation: a smart camera with a failsafe. If anyone touched that bench again, I'd have their face, their badge, and their license plate on record, filed to 3 external nodes before sunrise. My daughter passed me the screws without a word. We worked in silence, but not tension. This wasn't helplessness. It was precision. Across the street, the SUV pulled away. Slowly. Like they'd seen what they needed to see. Good. I attached the mount under the lip of the porch awning, angled for maximum coverage. The device looked like a motion sensor, but inside it was logging every second of thermal signature, movement, and audio spike. I ran the wires through the wall, back to a secure drive inside the breaker panel, completely legal, fully documented. I stepped back and checked the feed from my phone. Clean, sharp, time overlay active, watermark embedded. The bench wasn't just protected now, it was armed with truth. I didn't need speculation. I had a framework. What I needed next was access, a way to show the rest of the neighborhood what Patricia had become before she did this to someone else's family. The fake violations, the ghost contractors, the fraudulent portal, the fear, and the moment she zip-tied a seizure notice to my daughter's memory. She made this war personal. No more warnings, no more restraint. Next time someone stepped onto this property with a threat, they weren't going to walk away with silence. They were going to walk straight into evidence. I found Darren again in the last place anyone would expect a board member to be, leaning against the far wall of the maintenance shed near the East tennis courts, sipping from a paper coffee cup like he was hiding in plain sight. His tie was crooked, shirt wrinkled, and eyes tired, like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't announce myself, just stood a few feet away and waited. He glanced up, startled at first. Then he just nodded. "You see the tag?" he asked. "Bench got labeled non-compliant. Patricia's not even pretending anymore." He exhaled. "She said the board voted to expand the visual uniformity clause." I never saw a motion, never saw a vote. "She forged your name again?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know what you think you're building, Nathan," he said finally. "But whatever it is, you're going to need more than suspicion and screenshots." I didn't flinch. I held up my phone and tapped the screen. A short clip played, clear footage of a man in a generic security vest, zip-tying the orange placard to the cedar bench. No badge, no visible ID. Darren watched it play once, then again. He didn't look away the second time. "She's using funds from the discretionary repair budget," he said, line item labeled external remediation. It's buried under code 217B. That was the crack I'd been waiting for. You have access? Darren hesitated. He ran his hand through his thinning hair and looked out at the courts. 2 kids were practicing under the sun. One missed a shot and laughed, innocent, unaware of the quiet war playing out in their neighborhood. I backed everything up when the portal started redirecting, he said softly. I didn't trust what she was changing. I thought maybe I'd need proof someday. Today is that day. He nodded once, no fanfare, no dramatic speech, just a quiet admission that he'd finally had enough. He pulled out a flash drive from his coat pocket and handed it to me like it weighed 100 pounds. It's all there. Transfer logs, duplicate signatures, subdomain registry, even the contractor payment approvals. She's been pulling from restricted reserves for months. I didn't ask why he hadn't come forward. Sooner I already knew. People don't stay quiet because they agree. They stay quiet because they're tired, cornered, or just trying to survive. But Darren had chosen to speak now, and that made all the difference. I can't be the face of this, he added quickly. Not yet. Not until you have something solid. But if it goes to court, I'll sign a statement. That was more than I'd hoped for. We left the shed separately. Back at my house, I plugged the drive into my offline system. As promised, the files were complete. Dated transfers, policy changes, and, most damning of all, copies of digital meeting minutes that showed board approval from Darren on days he'd never logged in. She'd faked a quorum, faked board decisions, used that to authorize her hired enforcers, and access financial accounts meant for infrastructure upkeep. But what sealed it was the registry document for the HOA's enforcement portal. The hosting account Patricia used, it listed a contact name, Marcus Leavitt, not a board member, not a contractor, a former colleague of hers from a defunct private security startup. I ran his name through the state business registry. His license had expired 3 years ago. The firm folded, but the shell company remained, used now as a front to invoice Patricia's HOA fraud, misrepresentation, unlicensed enforcement. And now I had it all. I compiled everything into a new folder, SC Fraud Master. Then I did one more thing. I printed it all, because when people like Patricia lose control, they go after servers, after files. But paper? Paper doesn't crash. I loaded the folder into a sealed envelope, and the next morning I placed it in the mailbox at Andrea Salazar's office, marked, "For review, unauthorized enforcement evidence." I didn't wait for confirmation, because when Darren handed me that flash drive, Patricia's house of cards started collapsing, and now I was going to be the one to push it over. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't try. Instead, I spread everything across the dining table, blueprints of the HOA's portal network, Darren's files, the forged board approvals, and the surveillance footage stitched together from 3 angles. I moved like I used to back on the force, silent, methodical, detached. But this wasn't a case. This was my home. By sunrise, I had a full report ready. But this wasn't about submitting paperwork anymore. Patricia had built her shield on the assumption that no one would ever push hard enough to make the truth matter, that everyone she intimidated would fold. I wasn't folding. I was escalating. The first thing I did was print a summary packet, 3 pages front and back, formatted like a municipal complaint report. It included timestamps, screenshots, and Darren's quietly damning metadata. I sealed it in an unmarked envelope and dropped it at the local councilwoman's office under the door, with a note that read, "Urgent, Silver Crest, HOA, Unauthorized Enforcement Authority." The second was more public. I built a new subdomain using an anonymous hosting provider and posted the scanned documents, matching them to open access county maps and business license revocations. I blurred Darren's name, but left everything else intact. The digital evidence couldn't be denied. File hashes matched public logs, and every screenshot was backed by metadata that had already been cross-verified by Andrea's office. Then I got to work on the community itself. I printed 20 flyers. Do you know who's enforcing your HOA? Each one had a QR code that led to the public report, hosted off-site, outside Patricia's reach. I slid them into storm doors, tucked them under windshield wipers, left them at the base of mailboxes like breadcrumbs. The message was simple. If they've come for you, you're not alone. I waited 2 hours. By mid-morning, 5 residents had already scanned the report. One of them, Carlos, the dad from the tennis courts, walked past my house twice, slower each time. He didn't wave, but he nodded. The third time, he stopped. She threatened to fine me for having unregistered guests, he said, voice low. My brother came to stay for 2 nights after surgery. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just power tripping. She was targeting. I nodded. She's already crossed into criminal grounds, I told him. But what I need now is scale, impact, proof that this isn't just me or you. Carlos looked down the street. You're saying we go public? Not all at once. But I need enough people to sign a request for HOA oversight suspension. If we hit the threshold, the city forces a board audit. How many signatures? 20% of the neighborhood. His eyebrows lifted. That's a lot. I already have 5. You'd be 6. He didn't hesitate. Where do I sign? I handed him the form. By noon, I had 9 names. But it was more than that. Something had shifted. People weren't avoiding eye contact anymore. They were pausing on their porches, checking their mail twice, stepping outside to talk to neighbors instead of nodding from a distance. Patricia's invisible grip was starting to crack. Back inside, I checked my private server. Andrea had opened the evidence envelope. A secure link had been generated from the city portal, labeled Active Review Unauthorized Enforcement, SCEHOA. She hadn't called me. She didn't need to. The system was moving. I uploaded the full case packet to the link. Then I added something extra, a 48-hour countdown clock embedded on the public page. Once it hit 0, the report would automatically forward to the state's Consumer Protection Office and 2 local newsrooms. I didn't want attention. I wanted pressure. Because while Patricia was busy playing power broker behind HOA bylaws, I was mobilizing every mechanism she didn't think a resident could reach. Carlos texted me an hour later. She just called an emergency board meeting. Private, no notices sent out, perfect. I sent him one message back. Let her meet. We'll show up with the law. I pulled up the community petition form again. 14 signatures now. By the end of the day, I'd have enough. And once I did, Patricia wouldn't just be dealing with angry residents. She'd be dealing with a forced audit, a state inquiry, and a police report she couldn't overwrite, because this wasn't a violation hearing anymore. This was the opening act of her removal. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, unannounced, unofficial, and entirely outside the HOA's required notice period. Patricia thought no one would notice. No sign on the bulletin board, no community-wide email, not even a line item on the digital calendar. But Darren noticed. He texted me the location at 2:17 p.m. Unit 8A, garage closed. Lights will be on. 8A was a rental property near the East Gate, technically within Silver Crest, but owned by a Shell LLC that Patricia's cousin managed. I knew it because I'd checked property records last week, searching for any addresses tied to board members not listed on official communications. At 6:49 p.m., I parked 2 blocks away and walked in from the Greenbelt path behind the lot. No cameras, no HOA sensors, just low shrubs and forgotten mulch. I reached the side fence and crouched behind the utility box, camera ready. Through the slats, I could see 5 of them seated in the converted garage, folding chairs, a whiteboard, and Patricia standing like she was addressing a courtroom. I zoomed in. She held a printout of my flyer in one hand and a list in the other. 16 signatures as of this afternoon, she said. That's enough to trigger review. We've got 2 days before the city starts sniffing. One of the board members, a balding man I recognized as Fred Denton, the secretary, asked, "What about the enforcement contractors? If the city investigates—" "They were never formally authorized," Patricia replied, "which means there's nothing in the public record. The invoices go through Marcus's company under general neighborhood services, plumbing, lawn care, minor compliance work. They can't trace intent." Darren had been right. She'd covered herself, on paper. But now I had her voice saying the quiet part out loud. I captured 6 minutes of footage, her confirming the fake enforcement portal, her bragging about signature suppression, and her mocking the petition drive. It was enough to invalidate any good faith defense she might have tried later. I slipped away as quietly as I'd come. Back home, I ran the audio through a scrubber, leveled the background, and added subtitles. Then I embedded the video on the report site, right above the countdown clock. 18 hours remained. The next morning, I printed a different kind of flyer. Emergency HOA board. Meeting was held in secret. Here's what they said. It had a screenshot of Patricia mid-sentence, blurred faces of the others, and a new QR code linking to the video. I dropped them in mail slots and slid them under garage doors before sunrise. By 10 a.m., the site had over 100 hits. At noon, Andrea called. "I've got 2 investigators ready to step in," she said. The petition crossed the threshold. "But you need to hold steady. Don't push the video yet. Let us make contact first." "It's already live," I said. "It's just not public. I can pull it if needed. Leave it hidden. For now. We'll take the legal route first." Andrea never asked for favors, so when she did, I listened. I encrypted the link and password protected the page, sending her the credentials. The clock remained, but the page required a key. That evening, I prepared for what came next. I installed 2 more surveillance points, one near the east entry path and one angled toward the side of the house. Then I set up a redundant off-site backup system through my consultancy's old vendor line. The video evidence, petition data, server logs, and forged documents now lived in 3 different locations, including a locked vault 2 counties over, because Patricia wasn't going to go quietly. People like her never did. But now she was cornered. No board meeting, no fake fine, no generic contractor could undo what she'd already said on camera. Her paper trail was compromised, her authority was shrinking by the hour, and her own treasurer had turned witness. At 11:03 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Andrea, city audit triggered, fraud complaint logged, public notice to be posted tomorrow morning." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I walked outside, sat on the cedar bench, and waited for dawn. The moment the notice went up, everything would change. Patricia's silence wouldn't protect her anymore, because now the whole neighborhood would know. She'd built her power on fear, and I'd turned fear into evidence. The notice went up at 8:14 a.m., taped clean and level to the bulletin board near the pool entrance, right where Patricia used to hang her, monthly reminders and violation alerts. But this wasn't a flyer, it was an official seal, embossed city letterhead, language that didn't leave room for ambiguity. Notice of pending oversight audit, Silvercrest Estates HOA, issued by Department of Neighborhood Compliance in coordination with City Enforcement Review Office. Below that, in crisp print, allegations of unauthorized enforcement activity, improper financial conduct, and failure to follow procedural requirements have been formally logged. The HOA board is hereby under provisional administrative review. All enforcement actions are suspended effective immediately. I stood there with my coffee, surrounded by others, pretending to read it for the first time. But I wasn't pretending. Carlos was the first to speak. "She really did it," he muttered. "She finally pushed too far." A woman beside him, gray hair tied back, nodded slowly. "She fined me for wind chimes," she said quietly. "Said they were a disruptive acoustic accessory." We stood in a strange collective silence. Not relief. Not yet. More like held breath. Then someone said what everyone else was thinking. "So what happens now?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked toward the clubhouse, where Patricia's private board meetings usually happened. I knew Andrea's people would already be inside, documenting everything. But I needed to see it. Halfway there, I passed Darren. He was standing just off the sidewalk, holding a plain folder in both hands like it might explode. His eyes met mine briefly, then dropped again. He looked like a man caught in the gravity of a decision long overdue. "Are they inside?" I asked. He nodded. "City representatives. 2 of them. One's from enforcement, the other's legal. They asked for all board members to attend in person. Is Patricia coming?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "She'll come. She won't have a choice." I stepped into the clubhouse foyer, just as the first city representative emerged from the side office. She was calm, clipboard in hand, voice low but firm as she addressed a couple seated near the front desk. During this audit, you are not authorized to process fines, file violations, or issue citations of any kind. If you do, those actions will be treated as willful interference, no one argued. Inside the conference room, files were spread across the table. Patricia's signature was on nearly all of them. Dozens of approval stamps, invoices paid to Marcus Levitt Contracting, enforcement photos with no author name, and monthly minutes with identical timestamps. Darren stepped forward, quietly placed his folder down beside the others, and cleared his throat. "I never signed these," he said. The city investigator didn't flinch. "We know. The metadata supports your claim. You'll be listed as a cooperating witness." Patricia arrived 6 minutes later. She came in fast, sunglasses still on, holding a leather-bound binder like it was armor. Her voice echoed too loud in the quiet room. "This is a misinterpretation," she said, before the door fully closed. "I acted within board authority. We followed procedural standards." The investigator cut her off with a raised hand. "Miss Leland, this is an administrative review, not a discussion. You'll have a chance to respond to the findings after we conclude document verification. I demand legal representation. You're free to retain counsel. But at this stage, your authority to act on behalf of Silvercrest Estates HOA is suspended pending resolution." Patricia stood still for a beat too long. Then she sat, face tight, and said nothing else. I didn't stay for the rest. I'd done my part. I'd submitted the evidence, gathered the signatures, triggered the audit, and exposed the system she built. Her downfall didn't need an audience. I walked home the long way, cutting through the trail behind the tennis courts. The wind was high, brushing through the trees in waves. I stopped by the utility box where I'd crouched the night of the secret meeting. Same rusted bolts, same weeds pushing through the gravel. But the air felt different, lighter. When I got home, my daughter was sitting on the porch, legs curled under her, tablet in hand. The orange tag on the bench was gone, not removed, gone. Someone had clipped the zip tie and folded it neatly beside the mailbox. She looked up at me and smiled. "Did it work?" I sat beside her and nodded. Yeah, it worked because the storm had landed, and Patricia was finally the one cleaning up after it. The community hall had never been this full. Fold-out chairs creaked under the weight of neighbors who'd never once shown up to vote on budget lines or holiday decorations. Retired couples, young families, the guy with the lifted truck who usually kept to himself, even the teenage girl from the corner house, still in her school uniform, earbuds in, stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching. People weren't just curious, they were ready. At the front, the temporary moderator appointed by the city stood behind the podium, a middle-aged man with the tired patience of someone used to sorting through chaos. Beside him sat Andrea in full uniform, not armed, not posturing, just present. That was enough. Patricia arrived 10 minutes late. She entered like she still believed it was her room, heels sharp against the tile, binder in hand, chin high. But no one moved to make room for her, not the other board members, not the new faces from the city's oversight panel. And when she walked toward the front row, she found her usual seat already taken by Darren. She sat 2 rows back, quiet. The moderator called the meeting to order. This session is an emergency general assembly, requested under municipal code, following a triggered audit and provisional board suspension. He gestured toward the back wall, where a large screen was mounted. We'll be presenting an overview of the investigation thus far. Residents will have time for questions afterward. The screen came to life with a simple slide. Silvercrest Estates, Enforcement Abuse and Procedural Fraud Review. I'd helped build the presentation. I knew what was coming. The first image, a scan of the original bylaws, dated, signed, and filed with the city. Then came the altered version, Patricia's, with us undocumented additions and illegal language about detainment and seizure. Murmurs started as the slides shifted. Payment logs to Marcus Levitt's company, overlapping digital timestamps, the fake enforcement portal, the QR-coded violation notices with no legal standing. Then the video. Patricia, standing in the garage, during the secret meeting, holding my flyer, saying, 16 signatures as of this afternoon. That's enough to trigger review. They can't trace intent. The room didn't erupt. It froze. One breath, a silence heavy enough to press against the walls. Patricia didn't speak. She just stared at the screen, as if denying it could unmake it. When the video ended, the moderator continued like nothing had happened. The city's investigation has concluded that Ms. Leland operated beyond the scope of board authority, utilized falsified documentation to initiate enforcement actions, and misallocated HOA funds to unlicensed third-party contractors. He turned toward Andrea. "Chief Salazar?" She stood slowly and scanned the room. "There will be no criminal charges filed today," she said. "But the impersonation incident is still under review by the DA's office. My presence here is to ensure this community understands. What happened was not legal, it was not procedural, and it is not going to happen again." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. "Your safety does not belong to a single board member's interpretation of order. It belongs to the law, to truth, and to your willingness to hold each other accountable." Someone clapped, then two more, and suddenly the room was filled with it. Applause not of celebration, but of release, as if a pressure valve had finally been thrown open after months of silence. The moderator raised a hand. "We will now take nominations for interim board members to serve until the next election cycle." I stood, not to nominate myself, but to raise a name. "I nominate Darren Mays as interim president." Heads turned. Darren looked stunned, but he didn't back down. He stood. And when asked if he accepted, he said only one thing: "I stayed quiet too long. That won't happen again." He was voted in by a wide margin. So were Carlos and 3 other residents who had once been targets, now ready to be stewards. Patricia left without speaking. Binder clutched under her arm like a shield that had finally cracked. No one followed her out. I remained seated long after the room had emptied, not because I didn't know what came next, but because, for the first time in a long while, I could finally breathe in my own neighborhood without waiting for another threat. And across the street, the cedar bench sat untouched. It was quiet again. Not the uneasy watch-your-back silence that had settled over Silver Crest for the past few months, but real quiet, peaceful, honest, the kind that returned only after something unnatural had been removed. The orange tag never reappeared. The enforcement portal went offline the day after the audit. The city confirmed Marcus Leavitt's company was officially dissolved and blacklisted from any future HOA contracting within county limits. Patricia hadn't been seen since the meeting, and according to Darren, she'd submitted a one-line resignation to the city and disappeared from every HOA contact list. She didn't fight it, maybe because she knew the fight had already ended. What replaced her wasn't perfect. It never is, but it was better. Transparent. The new interim board issued a public statement outlining changes. No more private enforcement agents. All rule changes required a public vote, and all HOA funds subject to quarterly resident audit. And the first item they repealed? Section 12.4, unauthorized vehicle presence. I kept the security van parked right where it had always been. Not out of defiance, but because it belonged there. It had earned that space the way my wife once had, through service, through quiet strength, through hours spent making others feel safe when no one else would. Darren stopped by a week later with a new placard in hand. It was wooden, not plastic, engraved, paid for by resident vote. It read, "This bench is a memorial to Sarah Cole, founder of the Silver Crest Community Watch. May her dedication to truth and safety guide every neighbor who sits here." I didn't speak when he handed it to me. I just nodded and helped him mount it. My daughter sat cross-legged on the porch, holding the level tool, eyes focused like the installation was sacred. It was. That afternoon, Andrea called. "Thought you might want to know," she said. "DA's office has decided to open a broader inquiry into HOA overreach across the county. Your case is going to be the lead example," I exhaled. "You think it'll change anything?" "I think it already did," she said. "You just lit the match." She paused, then added, "Proud of you, partner." After we hung up, I sat on the bench for a long time, and I thought about every moment that had led here, the fake officers, the silent neighbors, the subtle threat of power pretending to be law. I thought about Darren and what it took to finally come forward, about my daughter, who never asked me to fight but watched every moment I did. I thought about my wife, about the circuits we soldered together in the garage, the diagrams she left behind in her sketchbook, the little notes on the fridge, the first time she called this place safe. It was safe again, because I made it so. And now, every family who received a fine for the color of their porch light or the way their flag hung had someone to call, someone who understood, someone who wouldn't flinch when power tried to put on a badge it hadn't earned. Silvercrest didn't change because the rules were rewritten. It changed because enough people decided they mattered. It changed because truth was louder than fear, because one man said no when the whole system expected him to nod and comply. And if that's the story you've just watched unfold, if you've ever stood in your doorway and wondered what would happen if you pushed back, if you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. This one started with a forged violation tag, but it ended with a neighborhood reclaimed,